Justin Burrows. This is Commerce Chats by High Velocity.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I like to visualize things. Just
Yeah,
me
too.
Yeah. I'm gonna move you to just a. Actually, could I screen share on the?
Yeah, please.
On the screen that I'm actually seeing you on. Let me just share a window. Let me just share a window because that's probably going to be easier. Let me just share Miro. So, what is a cart? Well, it's just a basket of items, right? So you've got items, and then you've got items that so each item describes. I mean, really, it's just a data model, right? So it's your cart is just a model, and you've got items within that model. Maybe I should be using a text editor or something. That would probably be a little easier. And then you might have other descriptive information about what's happening here. But this is why I think everyone in the composable space thinks contracts first, right? You've got promotions, you've got you might have shipping groups, right? You basically have a data model, but this is driven by the business needs, not by the technology, right?
Yeah.
And then the question is, well, what do I do with this model, right? So thinking about going back to the original question of, well, what is an e-commerce platform? Well, back in the day, it was, well, where does my cart live, right? So that's, ultimately you buy an e-commerce platform because you're trying to sell stuff, right? Well, how do I sell stuff? Well, I sell stuff through a shopping cart, right? So I need a place to put the shopping cart. Well, does it need to be? Does your cart even need to live in an e-commerce platform, right? You've got a SKU. You have a quantity at a basic level. You've got a quantity, and in the case of furniture, you might have a configuration, right, that describes that that product. Obviously, there's some pricing that lives in here. You've got maybe some discounts that apply to this, and those are tied back to the promotions that are in your cart, right? I can model this without having any understanding of what my commerce vendors are going to be, right? And I could actually build this without actually contracting with. I know my partners in the commerce space are not going to be happy with this, but does this have to live in a quote piece of commerce software that I've licensed to use? No, I mean I could persist this model object anywhere, right? I could put this in the cloud and give it an ID and store it in S3, right? We've a lot of us use AWS, right? So store it in S3 and then fire off an event, right? So, or maybe we turn this into an order, right? Whoops, sorry, I know this is getting kind of small here, but it's just, yeah, like, so back to the question of, well, what is an e-commerce platform? Well, guess what? You're building it, right? So going back to your bucket of bolts mentality, well, AWS S3 is in your tool chest, right? It's in your bucket of bolts.
Yeah.
Is S3 an e-commerce platform? No, it's just a tool that is used. It's just object storage, right? It's file storage or it's cloud storage, but this could be object storage, or maybe you get more advanced. All right, so maybe S3 can't handle the volume, right? So now your storefront grows, and now you're pushing through 100,000 orders a day, and S3 can't keep up because of the latencies. Or maybe you're paying too much for S3, or now you want to store these objects in, I don't know, Elasticache or something like that, right? You need to push these card objects closer to where the client is, right? And with S3, you're pegged to a region, right? So if the customer is coming in from France, right, now they're having to call an API that maybe in the cloud or maybe it's on the edge somewhere, but it's still the persistence of your card is still pegged to S3, which is living in a region, probably in US, or it's not where you need it, right? So now you can start so thinking about tech debt, right? So maybe the fact that I'm stuffing my cards in S3 is tech debt, and that's fine. It's tech debt that I'm willing to live with right now because I want to get this going and give my business a chance to grow.
Yeah.
And I don't want to spend time imagining what I don't want to build for 100,000 orders a day. I want to build for 500 orders a day, right?
Yeah.
And so, why spend, countless hundreds of thousands of dollars now building for a future that may never come to fruition because I spent so much time building the damn thing that that we're never going to get there. So anyways, yeah. So what is an e-commerce platform? Well, it's just a bucket of bolts, right? I might decide that, we maybe the cart lives eventually in I don't know, some sort of a catalog platform, or, like a cart engine that provides support for catalog. Because, you have to think about, well, where does the catalog live too, right? I've got a SKU here, right? So I'm driving PDPs and CLPs, and what's driving that, right? Well, we could talk about that, but
Product detail page, category listing page, which is the grid
right.
of all the things going down. Yes.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, sorry. But when I'm trying to build a design around selling, I'm not worried about that when I'm trying to solve this particular problem right now. What I'm trying to solve it for is, I've got a basket of items and I want to be able to convert that basket of items to an order. So, now we have a contract, right? We have a contract that's a cart, and now I want to define an API. I want to define a verb called, convert cart to order, right? Right. So now we need to bolt on things like shipping addresses and, customer information, right? Because now we need to gather that. We've got payment information, payments, there could be multiple, right? If we're splitting payments across multiple services, you might have gift cards, et cetera, right? We've got, shipping information, we've got billing, et cetera, right? So now and it all just gets added to the contract, right?
Yeah.
And now we want to convert this to an order, and, maybe this is just an event, right? We've already got a payload. So let's just send an event to, throw an event to an event bus, like SQS or something like that, right? So now I have not picked an e-commerce vendor in the classic sense yet, right? So we're just, maybe we're storing, right? But the key components of this architecture are, I need, what's the word I'm thinking of in technology terms? I need a storage. I need persistent storage, right? So I need, what's the word? Durability, right? So I need durability, right? I need to make sure that this payload lives somewhere, and I need durability in the events, right? And I need the events that are getting fired off. So we need an order here, and we need an event pipeline that, right? So I haven't even picked an e-commerce vendor yet.
Yeah.
But
what do you mean by durability? No, what do you mean by durability? Does that just like it's persistence? Is it uptime? What does that mean? I'm liberal arts.
It's both,
so...
right? It's both, right? So I need a place where I could put something where it's going to be available forever and ever, and that if for some reason, let's say we've got an OMS system back here where these orders are eventually going to, maybe this is probably asynchronous, right? Right. So this is probably flowing through some other, like there's an event here that's getting fired off, right? So there's maybe it's SQS. If we're staying in the AWS world, it's probably SQS, right? Something like that. But again, this is not vendor locked, right? Where we haven't, our order pipeline is not locked into a particular e-commerce vendor, right? We can do all of this without, this is synchronous, sorry. Here we go. I guess so this is asynchronous. But anyways, so it's durable because, we need to be able to, let's say this fails, right? So we need to requeue the event, and right. So this needs to be durable storage, right? It needs to be available, right? So our essential technical requirements here are availability, right? We need to be able to persist it. It needs to be durable. Persistence. It needs to be durable, right? Right. So I might. But I guess my point is our requirements around this are not, our durability needs to be high, but latency can be low, for example, right? So I don't need this to be available, it depends on maybe we need to turn these orders around very quickly, and latency is important. But
You mean
in the cart
latency is
world,
high? High latency is okay. Is that what you meant?
high latency is
In this
okay, but
particular.
here needs to be low, right? So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
if there can be, I mean, once we move to 100,000 orders a day, well, now, all right, what are the characteristics of this durable storage? Well, maybe they no longer meet our requirements, and we might need to move to Elasticache, or we might need to move to, some other model. So, S3 might not be a good place to store your carts. This is where, signing on with a commerce vendor might be helpful, because now you might need to transition to a vendor that provides some edge functionality, right? So they, maybe they have a really fast cart implementation, but we're probably still going through an API gateway, right? So I'm like thinking about this on the fly, thinking,
no, please, yeah, this is wonderful. When you say edge, I believe that refers to, like, you're basically taking data and saving it out much closer to the person who's going to be using it. Is that right?
Exactly, right. So yeah, exactly. So one of the things that made monoliths so difficult is that, you're probably, your monolith is, you're running several instances of your monolith, and it's sort of the classic load balancing model, right? So anytime you need to scale up, you spin up new instances of that thing, and that thing is huge, right? So the operating cost of that thing is massive, right? You can't get by with this tiny little runtime that, it's a massive platform. It's probably, like some massive Java stack that takes up gobs of memory, because you've got, 100,000 active sessions running inside of that thing. So it can't just, so it's running, thousands of threads, and right. So it's huge, right? So, and that thing lives somewhere. And if you've got a client that's running, I don't know, if you're an international retailer, and you've got, I don't know, let's go out to, I don't know, Bulgaria or something, right? And you've got somebody on a mobile device, and let's say, the long pole in this tent is the connection between the mobile device and whatever API, whatever endpoint, or whatever origin it's talking to, right? Well, if the origin is in, let's say your API gateway, that application, that mobile app is talking to, is out in AWS, US West 1, right? Well, now this thing is, the latency on this is going to be crazy, right? So it's going to be super high.
Did you say connection or convection? Did I mishear that? Was
connection?
Oh, connection. I was like, oh, that's a new one. It's like an oven.
Right.
Okay, yes, connection.
Oh, no. So let's say you're, the classic headless on top of a monolith, right? So you've got an API gateway here, or maybe the APIs are living in your monolith, which is right. So you've got monolith that's running, let's say, in an EC2 container, in US West 2, right? West 2. So in order for this customer in Bulgaria to make the half dozen API calls needed to render the view that this customer is trying to see, let's say it's their cart. Well, now, you've got massive latencies here that are causing it to take forever to render this view. All right, so now you introduce some edge functionality. Maybe it's a caching layer, right? So you've got an edge cache, right? So now, but this is, again, caveats. There's a lot of caveats with this. So your monolith still lives in, US West 2. This is all the functionality, but there's a cache here that you've got to think about, well, what's the churn, right? So if you're building a caching layer, it's adding this massive layer of complexity into your application, but you're saving, so the edge. So your edge cache runs everywhere, right? So if you're using AWS as a cloud provider, they have presence. I think CloudFront is CloudFront. I forget what their
it probably has
is.
cloud in
or
it.
maybe
There's
using
cloud
Cloudflare. maybe it's Cloudflare, whatever it is, right? But you've got an edge cache, and the round trip here is much, much lower because this edge network has a presence in Poland, right? So they've got a node in Poland, and this you've now got an asynchronous pipeline between your edge and your monolith that is keeping the data here relatively fresh, right? So you have object cache. This is where we start to talk about eventual consistency, right? So now you have object caches, an object cache that maybe holds your product information and pricing, right? And instead of having a blocking connection between, right? Obviously, you don't want a blocking call here because now you're back to square one. But this has
what's a blocking call? Just for
so
me.
A blocking call is if a web app or let's say a mobile app is making an API call on behalf of the view. So let's say you're viewing a shopping bag, right? You've got to make an API call somewhere in a headless model. You've got to make at least one or more API calls somewhere to get the data needed to render that shopping bag view in your app, right? So what do we need to do to pull that together? Well, we certainly need to get a cart. We might need to make multiple calls to get decoration for each of the items in that cart, right? If you need to put images and other media elements, maybe there's decorative content describing each of those products, right? So you may need to make multiple API calls. I'm not sure I would advocate for that because the more work that you're forcing your app here to do, the more the more risk of network latencies that are going to affect the user experience here, right? So I kind of like to build this sort of large object, this kind of monolithic view of the cart with all of the decorative data, but it's a choice, right? So so you've got product, you might have product decoration here that describes, or product content here that describes the product, but if you're smart, you would build an API gateway that says, hey, if the client hasn't asked for product content, let's not orchestrate that, right? Let's just only build the view that, build the model that the client requested. So, you're probably using GraphQL in your API gateway, right? So now in your edge cache, you probably have an API gateway here, right, in front of it. Sorry, kind of filling this out on the fly here. So I've got people on the other end who are eye rolling. It's like, that's not the way I would do it. And that's fine. It's just a choice, right? It's
getting connections to work, on the fly when you're trying to. This is brilliant. Go ahead. Getting connections to work on the fly.
So now you have an API gateway that's smart enough to grab. So let's say you have an API called get cart back here. Well, hopefully it's smart enough to only orchestrate what's needed, right? So the API knows that, well, to get.
Oops. I think I might have dropped you there for a second. Wait, there you go. You're back.
What happened there?
Yeah, just a.
Right. So maybe the cart, maybe I want to go directly to the back end for the cart, but to get the decoration, because the decoration doesn't change very much. Maybe I want to go to the edge for that, right? So now I'm orchestrating now to get the raw, get the cart object, right? So the cart object may only have a list of SKUs and quantities, right? And configurations, right? So it's just raw data, and maybe you probably do want pricing and promotion in there too, but it's less information. And I can, while I'm fetching the cart, and maybe it's a much smaller payload, so I'm not having, I am concerned about latency, but now I'm doing an awful lot less to get this. And concurrently, I can go get all the product decoration here, and it's less sensitive to cache latencies, right? Cache refresh latencies. So I can cache this data on the edge. So let's say there's a node here in Poland that has that data, and there's a TTL or time to live, right, on that payload that says, well, this doesn't change more than once a day, or maybe the churn rate on your catalog is, well, the merchandising team makes changes throughout the day, and then they publish once a day at the end of the day, right? Or maybe you have a CMS that's driving. Sorry, I'm kind of going all over the place here. Maybe you have a CMS here that your merchandising team is using to manage all of your decorative content, right? So here's where all your product content lives, and your merchandisers are up here, doing their job, merchandisers, and now you have a publishing process that says, hey, I published something, whoops, now go bust the caches, right? So now this data is just cached forever, right? Your edge cache caches your product data, your product decoration forever. And I only have to, if I'm a client and customer in Bulgaria, I only have to call an API in Poland to go get it, decoration, product content. So as you start to grow, then you start thinking about, all right, well, now we need to, serve customers in Bulgaria. How do we not give them a user experience that is awful? So, so when we publish, now we can say, let's go bust the cache and publish, bust the cache for the products that were affected, right? And now we reach out to, we call whatever your edge provider is and say, every piece of content in the edge cache has a key, right? And that key is the product ID or the SKU ID of that product. Hey, edge provider, go bust the cache for all these things. So I think it's asking a lot for a commerce vendor to provide all of this functionality, right? You've got to, that's why I say start with the contracts first, because this is what's going to live forever, right?
Yeah.
This notion of what a cart is, that basket of items hopefully will never change. And I can shift from a cart persistence, or a cart architecture that is just storing payloads in S3 to, let's say we decide to use a first-class e-commerce vendor at some point to persist our carts. Well, we can, through, there's middleware living in here, right? It's not just there's a payload, but then there's middleware that is orchestrating across, because we haven't talked about middleware at all. There's middleware that lives, and this is where this is where we're doing the work, right? All of our work is here, and it's abstracting, it's protecting us. Oh gosh, sorry, I'm drawing this all wrong, but you know what I'm saying, right? There's middleware in here that is saying, all right, I know how to get from a cart to, I know what needs to be done behind the scenes to make this cart, persist this cart, right? And day one, it could be in a cloud storage bucket somewhere, but day 800, maybe it's living with an e-commerce vendor, but this has not changed, right? This is the beauty of composable commerce. If I have a monolith back here, I can't really do this. And I suppose this is where composable kind of took on, this is how we got to composable in the first place is, well, I need to re-platform away from our monolith. How do I do that? Well, do I do it monolithically, or can I do it in increments, right? Can I say, well, you know what, this monolith is providing, sorry, I'm literally going, this is just stream of consciousness here, but our monolith is providing cart, promotions, coupons, campaigns, CMS, it's doing everything, right? And now let's say, all right, we're tired of having everything under one plate. We're spending $2 million a year in licensing fees to maintain this monolith, and
by the way, the personalization that we said that we really, really loved and that we were really, really going to use and pay a lot for, we don't use it all.
We don't use it at all. Yeah. Well, and that's all changing with, actually AI is starting to maybe make that finally a kind of a reality, right? So that's a whole nother topic. But so now we want to,
you find there's some things that you don't use that you thought you were going to use.
You thought you were going to use, and you're paying for. Yeah, you're paying through the nose for it, because this vendor sees it as a differentiator, and gosh darn it, our customers are going to pay for that differentiation, but you're not taking advantage of it at all. And who takes full advantage of all the bells and whistles in their e-commerce platform day one, their monolith day one? Nobody does, right? Nobody can afford to just be in the trenches building for a year and a half, 2 years while your company is not selling, right?
Well,
who can afford to do that?
I don't want to. I want to keep going with this, but do you remember there was something? Do you remember that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
There were these behavioral rules that you could set, and you could have like crazy scenarios. In fact, I think they were called scenarios that had target or something. Where it's like somebody visits a site 3 times, and you could pop up a message. You could change the whole assortment. You could really almost do anything. Brought the site to a crawl. I mean, like if you had like a lot of these, and it was a great idea. Everybody loved the idea. And it was this is like, it's like saying, I'm going to take up archery one day. It sounds really interesting, but the chances of you actually doing something like that, and certainly in a way that would actually move the needle in terms of like revenue, like never happened, because it was onerous. It was cool. It was fun, shiny, but yeah, you have all of these things. But again, who from day one takes advantage of all of those? Who even in day 365 or 720 takes advantage of those? So I mean, there's evolving needs.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I threw on my, things to think about in your, composable implementation that you don't fully need to worry about, but the more you do up front, the better off you are, is collecting data. Data is your friend. You don't necessarily need to do anything with it day one. You just need to collect it, right? So, for example, you mentioned, hey, writing a scenario that drives a rule that says, when I hit the site a certain number of times, then show this message and throw it into this slot on a page or whatever. Like you said, nobody does that, but I do care about the fact that I've had a customer log in 3 times over a certain period of time. I don't necessarily know what I want to do with that data right now, and I don't want to add a rule to my platform that is blocking access to my content computationally, right? So the problem with things like scenarios and like those rules-based implementations is that every time you hit the site, it's running every interaction with the platform is going through that rule set every time, right? So it's like, well, what about this? Well, what about this? Well, maybe this happened, or maybe this happened, but and maybe none of those things happen, but I still need to evaluate all those rules every time. And it just gets, and the more rules you add to the platform, the slower it gets. So you provided this great functionality, but the costs are tremendous, right? Of actually taking advantage of it. Whereas, maybe we do it all behind the scenes, right? So we just gather the data. So we've got interactions, obviously we're gathering selling data, but what about other events, right? So, and most retailers do this now with things like Google Analytics, right? That folks are doing this today, but it's usually used to help drive metrics around conversion, KPI, stuff like that, right? So you're driving a dashboard that's telling you how effective my site is, but I'm not able to use it to drive user experience, right? So so ultimately, all this conversation around targeters and scenarios, it's all about how do I drive a dynamic user experience that is based on the relationship that we've built with that customer over time. We want to treat a customer who's spent lots of time and spent lots of money on our storefront. Give them something that's a little more tailored to them. If we know that they're I don't know, let's use I guess a furniture metaphor. If we know that they've bought products in a particular with a particular fabric or design aesthetic repeatedly over multiple years, don't present them with something that is completely, the complete opposite of the design aesthetic that they're interested in, because it's insulting to the customer. It's like, well, don't you know me by now? But it's also going to lead to lower conversion rates. So thinking in terms of, well, data, right? So we're starting to talk about this now at Stern and Lilly, is how do we use the learning when we convert an order? I keep messing up the order of, there we go. When we convert an order, it's not enough to know that, well, it's not even just conversion, conversion. So we want to start keeping track of things like, well, what fabrics did they upholster? Did they, add or configure on their product? What styles, right? We have, various product families. What styles do they seem interested in, right? So it's not just about conversion. Do they seem interested in? So it's not just conversion, but it's also impressions, right? And again, we do this pretty well with, various analytic engines, but they're not used. We're not good at using that data to improve conversion rates, I guess, to provide. What's one of the vendors that we use? What do they call it? Product recommendations. There's a new word for it now, and it's now escaping me. We used to call it recommendations, right? But now there's a different term. Anyways, sorry, but it's basically recommendations, right? So browse, search, right? So what is the customer telling you? If I search for something, that's very important information.
Yes.
The customer is literally typing things into. They're taking the effort, right? What is the effort that the customer is putting into finding the product that they want? Product discovery. Thank you. Product discovery is kind of the new, right? So it's not just, that's the quote fancy new term now. So these are all events that, and this is where AI, I think, is going to start making an impact. Right. So now you're starting to see more AI engines that are kind of e-commerce oriented, right? The e-commerce AIs that are meant to replace all the old, replace all these old targeting recommendations engines, rec engines, right? That are very statically, they're driven by statically engineered rule sets, right? Static rule sets, right? If customer does this, then show them this. If a customer does this, show them this, right? And nobody has the time to build those rule sets, right? Whereas now, if you have in theory, if you have an AI that's gathering all of this data, we should be able to spit out set of, actually, you're really just matching, right? You're just matching product to customers, right? But you're not doing it through a static rule set. You're doing it through a matching engine, right? So you've got e-commerce AI that are these e-commerce AIs are consuming customer-facing events, right? Like browse and obviously conversions, right? And there's information about inherent in those conversions. What products were bought with what, right? Conversions. All right, let's say they converted a living room. Let's say we sold a living room. Well, do we want to sell more living room furniture to a customer that's already bought, that's already furnished the living room? Well, let's show them some dining room content using some of the styles, the same style. Like that's what an intelligent product discovery engine would provide, right? So we've got event data, but then we also have data that describes our products, right? And that's all being fed into this AI, right? So we've got our catalog, and it describes our products, and you've got customers that are describing themselves, right? So ultimately, that's what's happening with these events, right? So we're sending events, and it's just customers telling us who they are, right? Customers describing themselves. It's catalogs that are describing our products, and we've got an AI that's trying to build a model of, well, what does this customer look like? What do these products look like? And trying to match these up to each other, right? And we also, in the case of our, we have a design shop model, right? Our design shops are also telling us interesting information because they're using our designers are basically sending us data, right? Because they're holding the customer's hand and taking them through the sales funnel, right, themselves, instead of the customer being kind of on their own on the website. So the design shops, those designers have a lot of knowledge in their heads about what goes with what, how to translate what a customer is telling us about what their design aesthetic is into a set of product lines, right? So if a customer is telling us that their design aesthetic is, they love blue and they love red, right? Or they love blue and off-white, right? Well, we're not going to sell them. We're not going to push them fabrics that are, red and purple, right? We're gonna, well, maybe purple, but I'm not a designer. I'm not a product. I'm not a home designer, so I wouldn't really know. But you know what I'm saying, right? So AI is going to start playing a more and more important role here. But again, so we're not, do we sit around waiting? In the monolithic world, we would be sitting around waiting for our locked-in monolith to support AI. Whereas, in the composable world, we could just say, well, we've been gathering data, right? Thinking in terms of what are the important things we need to do from a composable standpoint. We've got to define, I mentioned defining contracts, define vendor agnostic, business focused contracts, API or otherwise, API or data contracts. We've got to, what was I going to say? Gathering data, right? Data is important. Gathering data. We don't need to know what we're going to do with it, right? Don't worry about what we're going to do with it, about what to do with it right now. Right? Just gather it, right? Yeah. Sorry, I have a few other things here, but I think we mentioned don't over-engineer right now. So right sizing, right? So right sizing, be intentional about your technical debt, about your tech debt, right? So if you're right sizing a promotions and a CMS or a promotions engine, don't go crazy up front, but know that you might decide to change that at some point in the future. Don't feel like you're locked into that choice, but it will cost you. It is going to cost you to rewrite it at some point in the future. But the impact of that rewrite on your overall application is going to be minimized by the fact that you're composable and that you've defined vendor agnostic, contracts up here. And then if you want to add AI later, who cares? Whatever. It's just
you have it.
What is your AI meant to drive? Well, it's the AI is meant to drive your category landing pages, right? Or maybe your search result grids, right? So now, so you've defined a contract that's called search results, right? Or grid, right? So we've got a contract called a product list, right? That product list drives your grids, right? I've got product A, product B, product C, right? And you've got a view that knows how to render a product list, right? You've got a grid page and a search results page. You've got a category landing page. You've got a bunch of things, but the product list contract is what it is, right? So
that's the thing.
Right, and you can drive that product list, that search results page, from a traditional search engine that isn't employing any AI. Maybe it's just using the metadata on your products to drive, or maybe the order of the products is driven by your merchandisers, right? Maybe they want to very specifically boost certain products, and they're not willing to give over control to an AI that they have limited control over. Or maybe you do want to plug in an AI behind the scenes But you can do that with a composable architecture. You need to do a little bit of work in your middleware to make that happen, but the contracts have remained unchanged, right? It's literally the same front end application, right? And it's the same user experience. I could just plug in that new, that new engine behind the scenes and still drive the same experience. I'm rambling on. I'm going all over the place.
No. Well, no. I'll tell you, I think you beautifully illustrated like what happens. Okay, so I remembered the word I was talking about earlier, and it was decomposed.
Yeah.
And what I find interesting is that vendors really have to, and almost it's like less vendors now and service providers is really kind of the thing. Like there's services where a vendor is like, I got a bucket. Whereas services, you are having to sing for your supper on every single functionality. And kind of the charge of composable is having to think about what are the irreducible items, components of this system. And you hit on it with like things that we don't think of as products, or rather we used to not think of as something that is a product, but cart, search, content, like all of these things, or in product list, like these are all, they're always going to be that way. And like you say, like we think in terms of product list instead of grid or whatever else. It's like whenever you need a list of products, this is the contract that gets you that.
Right.
And it goes back to your initial thesis of, it's like, well, what does e-commerce platform even mean, if anything?
Right.
And I think it really, it kind of melts your brain a little bit. But I think one of the challenges we have is that there are a lot of boxes out there that say middleware. And that's like, what is the term, small matter of programming, which I understand is ironic, where it's like, well, we'll figure it out like eventually. Sometimes that's not, especially if you're not used to it, like creating that middleware maybe is the way to having manageable middleware. Like, is it starting by thinking through like what you just did and getting the fundamental components and kind of thinking what you're wanting to provide? That's not a small question. I understand that. You can say it depends. That's fine.
Yeah, well, I mean, it definitely depends. See, because really, it's just a repository of the orchestrations that that populate the contracts that you've defined, right? So it is kind of this big bucket of whatever, it's where your business. Well, it's not even. I wouldn't even call it business logic. It's just. Let me go back. Start over. I think of middleware as it's just it's orchestrating access to the data that drives the view models that you're trying to present to the application, right? So it's, let me go back to my view again.
Sure.
Window. Hero. Right, so I drew a middleware box in here. And
you'll have to forgive me, but this is my BA background. Anytime somebody does a box, it's like, wait, that's a box. What is it? Where does that box live? And although nothing lives in here.
Where does it live? Where does it live? I see. Yeah. So I mean, it could live.
Well, I'm just talking about the box. What's in the box? What's in the box?
What's in the box? There's code in the box, right? There's. I mean, at least this is the way I think about it. It's code, right? So it's code that orchestrates across the service providers that are holding holding data. Well, what are they holding? It could be data. It could be other middlewares, right? It could be other API, or it could be APIs back. Well, there's always APIs back here, right? Those APIs give you access to data, to other business logics, to infrastructure, right? It is basically the glue that brings all of these disparate, you might have. So what have you got back here? So you've got I mean, think about all the different service providers we have. You might have, I just want to draw boxes. What have you got back here? You might have catalog, provider, whatever that looks like, right? So when I say a catalog provider, it's a persistent representation of what your catalog looks like right now, right? So or catalogs, right? There might be multiple catalogs.
Yeah.
You've got pricing back here. Like what are all the things that are needed to drive pricings? So you got price books, pricing, price books and pricing, right? You've got content back here, right? So there's like what is needed to drive this view, right?
Yeah.
Right. And what are all the things I need to talk to make this happen? And your middleware is the code that brings all of these things together. Well, I might need to reach out to. Go ahead.
Well, so I guess where I'm getting at is that I found that and I've been on a couple of headless projects where we go live and the latency is atrocious. And it's hard to figure out what's going on this thing, it's like we had like a platform that just didn't have any type of front-end platform that didn't really have a solid caching strategy. Like they didn't even think about it. And a lot of people can get themselves in trouble when they're doing this. And I guess what I'm asking is that I don't know what your experience is. You probably had it all figured out like immediately. A lot of people put in middleware. They start with the orchestration. It's the first time that they've had any elaborate, of that layer, that middleware layer, and they pants themselves in terms of performance. I mean, what is it? Why is that so hard? Or what is it that do you think that they might be missing? Or is it an it depends type of thing? Because it's an important answer.
Well, right. I mean, right. So I think that's just it's a failure to think about the cost, the latency cost of your orchestrations up front, right? So I think that's why a lot of folks use programming languages like Node and JavaScript in their middleware is because it makes it very easy to write, through the use of promise-based orchestrations to write orchestrations that perform relatively well, especially if you have to reach out to a lot of different systems. So, I'm a weenie when it comes to performance. I really care an awful lot about these things. So, I spend a tremendous amount of time thinking about, application performance monitoring and looking at the waterfall of an orchestration and understanding. You got to think about, obviously concurrency. So how much work can I do in parallel? Can I do in parallel? Parallel spelling, Brian. I need to worry about rate limits against service providers, right? You might need to introduce some caching here, right? So in my current world, I don't worry too much about caching because of there's a lot of cost. There's a lot of engineering cost associated with introducing caching into because now you need to worry about data consistency and yada, right? So it just gets very complicated, and it's a problem that I would like to have, where it would be nice to have to worry about caching. So I don't worry so much about that up front. So when you're writing your orchestrations, you want to measure latencies across the orchestration. So for example, if I'm running out of space here. So if I'm writing an orchestration that needs to reach across to multiple systems, all right, let's say we're trying to paint a view of a cart, right? So I've got, what are the entities that I need to get? Well, I need information about products. I might need product content. So product could be like core data, right? So what is the SKU of the product? What are the core attributes that are part of this core data that describes your catalog that is sort of enterprise wide, right? your fulfillment system doesn't care about the the care and feeding content that is rendered to the customer, right? But it does care about the SKU. It cares about the price that we promised. It cares about the delivery dates that we promised, right? It cares about that stuff, and it cares about some other, it cares about the fulfillment center that we've that will fulfill that product, et cetera, right? But we have product content. So we have core data, we have product content, and those probably live in different systems, or maybe not. You never know. You've got inventory, right? Inventory. You've got pricing that could live somewhere completely different. You've got what else? You've got promotions, and what are the promotions and coupons that have been added to that cart, right? So you're trying to render a cart, and you've got an orchestration that is trying to pull all this together. Well, and it also needs to know, well, what's in the cart, right? So there's the cart contents, right? So cart contents. So, and we've got, let's say we're trying to, add items to the cart, right? And there's a payload in, and there's going to be a payload out, right? And the payload out is the updated representation of the cart, and the payload in is what are the things I want to, things to add to cart, to the cart, right? So what are the things I need to do right up front? Well, I need, I probably need to validate that do I have access to this cart, access to the cart? Do the products, exist? Are they available for sale? Or are the products available for sale in sufficient quantities, right? Products available, right? There's a lot of stuff I need to do up front, and then I can actually, mutate the cart, right? Change the cart to, right? And now I need to, right? So just to do this stuff up front, all right, I need to go to inventory. I need to go to, to make sure that we have sufficient product available. I might not need to get the cart contents. Well, no, I do need to know, right? I need to know who owns that cart, right? Because you might be trying to get access to somebody else's cart, right? So there's a lot I need to do. So in terms of thinking about, all right, well, how do I optimize this orchestration? I try not to, I don't think about caching up front, right? Let's not solve a problem that may or may not exist up front, right? So so we know we need to get the cart. That's a sunk cost, right? Because we don't know what products are in the cart yet. We don't know, because we don't know what the products are. We don't know how to get the inventory. We don't know what, right? So we need to get the cart contents first. So we're making a call there. So thinking about the waterfall, right? So the first thing we need to do is get the cart. And that's get the cart and its contents. That's a sunk cost, right? So the first part of your orchestration is doing that. Well, maybe we need to validate the payload to make sure it's correct, but that's compute bound, right? So when I say compute bound, that means we can do that in middleware without reaching out to an external system. So validate the payload. So there's a cost there. So you need to think about, what is the late. So this is the timeline, right? You need to get the cart contents, and then the next thing we need to do once we have that. Now we need to do a little bit of validation, right? So you could do this with like a sequence diagram, right? But a sequence diagram, I think, doesn't really. It describes an implementation, but it doesn't describe how to optimize that implementation. So validate access to that cart. So for example, we have customer data too, right? Customer. So we know the customer that's trying to access the cart, right? So when I think about optimization, well, can we while we're getting the cart, also get the customer, right? Get the customer data, right? Because we're trying to validate that this customer has access to this cart. So when I think in terms of, because a classic, I think, a lot of people that are coming from the world of monoliths are coming from the world of probably Java or maybe like PHP or Python, right? So or it's probably either a Java or PHP based backend, maybe JavaScript, but probably not, right? So those folks are thinking, oh, get the cart, get the customer, validate access, right? But really, you could do this in parallel. And I think a lot of monoliths could apply or could it start applying principles around improving concurrency, right? Because if it's a monolith, you're probably making a call to a database to get a cart. You're making another call to a database to get a customer. But the SDKs that give you access to those monoliths are really designed to be called sequentially. Right? You're getting the cart, that makes a database call. You're getting the customer, that makes a database call. So it's like doing this, then do this, then it's just time consuming, right? Because you also don't want to overload your database. And we'll talk about rate limits. I need to drop actually in a couple of minutes. I just realized it's almost 11 o'clock here. But yeah, thinking in terms of concurrency, like you can make both of these calls at the same time. And thereby, this would reduce the overall latency. Then once you've verified access to the cart, now you need to fetch all of this other data, right? Well, think about what can I do now that I know what the list of products are. Like I can spin up again, thinking more in terms of node, spin up a promise to get all the inventories of those products, like using bulk. So if your commerce or the vendors that are providing the backing store for this information, they're probably providing a REST endpoint, right, to give you access to that data. Are there bulk ways of fetching data in bulk, right? Do I have to get products, one at a time, right? Hopefully not. Hopefully you can get products in bulk, like use like a query, like a query API to get you a bunch of products at once. So what the product IDs are, what the SKUs are. Let me go get all 10 of those products at the same time. Let me go get all the inventories for all those products at the same time, right? Minimize the number of API calls you're making, because you probably have rate limits that you're also being subjected to, right? Those vendors. So you have to stay within those rate limits. So there's a lot more we could talk about here, and I'm happy to chat about this if you want to. We could set up another session, but
sure.
But thinking about concurrency, thinking about designing the orchestration in a way that that applies like a waterfall based methodology, right? So what's the first thing I need to do? Get the cart and the customer to that's the first step. The next step is get the products, get the product contents, get the product inventory, right? I can do all these potentially in parallel, right? I don't need to do this sequentially anymore, like we used to have to in the monolithic days, right? Get the products, get their inventories, right? So your latency is the overall latency of this orchestration is based on, it's the longest straw, right? In this parallel promise, right? So you might be orchestrating 20 calls across 3 different systems to build a view of a cart, but the latency of that orchestration, and that's why I suggest to introduce logging into your orchestrations that are designed to measure, right? So you want measurements here, right? So you want to measure latencies here, right, at every step of the way. And each promise that you spin up to get the products, get the inventory, should measure its own latency, right? So that you know how long it's taking. And a good APM, like if you're using an APM like a New Relic or Datadog, it's going to be able to do that for you, because you can run this orchestration through an instrumenter, like an APM instrumentation, that will give you a nice view of that waterfall, so you can see exactly what's happening, right? Get the inventory, so you know what the long pole is or the long straw is at every step of the way. So you can really tighten up that orchestration, because like a get cart or add stuff to a cart should ideally only take maybe a few hundred milliseconds, or if it's taking longer than say 800 milliseconds, then you can introduce some caching. Well, maybe I don't need the latest and greatest product data. I need the latest and greatest inventories, right? So you got to think about, well, where can I cache and where can't I cache, right? So you generally don't want to cache inventories because you don't want to oversell, right?
Yeah.
You probably don't want to cache pricing Well, it
Mm-hmm.
depends on how quickly your pricing churns, right? You
Mm-hmm.
certainly don't want to cache promotions, right? So if you're trying to get the promotions on your cart, you need to
Mm-hmm.
have the latest and greatest, because if the promotion rolls off, you need to know
Mm-hmm.
that and pull that
Yeah.
promotion off the cart. Yeah, like, so stuff like that. So you want to be thinking about, where can I get away with not having the freshest data in the world in an
Well,
effort to improve user experience?
well, I think one of the things I see from here, and thank you for being here. I know you have to wrap up for now, but I think you see a lot of the patterns of the way of thinking that we're having to. There was a linear, monolithic way of doing things, and now we're kind of in a composable way. Part of the composable thing, it enables parallel thinking.
Yeah,
And I think that,
yeah,
we're seeing a lot of that of how do we as creatures of linear thinking adapt to
yeah,
a multifaceted,
yeah,
abstracted world. And I
yeah,
think not letting that creep in to how we develop our products and stuff, I think really is a challenge. It's good for our brains. It keeps us young.
yeah. It is.
But
It really is. Yeah. No, and it's had a huge impact on our ability to sell. I mean, thanks to the inherent scalability of composable and a sort of a microservices architecture built on, say, AWS Lambda or any of the
hmm
other small runtime,
hmm
rapid scaling type compute frameworks that exist out there in the cloud. Uh, we were able to scale up during peak without beating a sweat, right? We weren't sweating through
Yeah.
peak through the holiday peak, going like, oh, is it going to survive? I mean, we were to a certain extent,
Yeah.
but it wasn't because
Yeah.
we thought that the software was going to fall over. We do have bottlenecks that we want to improve in
Yeah.
our architecture, but it wasn't the composable stuff that we were worried about, the stuff that we
You were
built
acutely
using
aware.
composable.
You
Yeah.
weren't panicked, but you were very aware. And I
Yes.
think and you have an opportunity to really, if something goes wrong, you can change it. But
Yeah.
if you're on a monolith and
Right.
something is going wrong, you don't necessarily know.
Right. Yep.
Brian, thank you very much. If you would like to do another session sometime, doesn't thank you, Brian
Yeah.
Ballard, for joining me today.
Justin
Duties.
Burrows for inviting me here. That's always good to catch up about this stuff. I love talking about this
Cool.
stuff.
Brought to you by High Velocity, enterprise front-end app for your commerce stack. Faster performance, faster development, faster launch, faster change, all with one cost of ownership. Speed and direction. High Velocity. That means fast.